Director Engo, because I was 3 minutes late for work, announced publicly that he would deduct all 80,000 yuan of my project bonus for this year. I explained that last night, due to a critical system vulnerability, I had to work overtime until 4 a.m. He, however, scolded me, saying I was making excuses. Unwilling to argue further, I began to work with a sense of complete indifference. Less than half a month later, the company's platform was attacked by hackers. No one could restore the platform's logic, causing the company to instantly lose 300 million yuan. On Monday morning, to be honest, my mood was quite good. Having worked all night to patch the critical vulnerability in the database, the blaring alarm bells within the system finally ceased. Seeing the code running smoothly, I finally felt completely relaxed. With weary steps, I returned to my rented room. It was already 4 a.m. Lying on my bed, I calculated that I only needed to persevere through this month. Once the project bonus was issued, my mother's heart surgery expenses, the deficit from my housing loan, and my daughter's tuition for the next half year would barely be enough to cover everything. Little did I expect that when the alarm rang, I opened my eyes only to find it was already too late. I had actually overslept by 3 minutes. I frantically rushed into the office building. The time clock displayed a merciless number, 9:03. The company's internal system, fb.com, flashed a dazzling red late arrival warning. In that instant, my heart skipped a beat. This spelled disaster. I was certain to be harshly reprimanded again. I had thought, at worst, I would just receive a few scolding words from my superior. Little did I know that Director Engo would deliver a fatal blow. During the morning meeting, dozens of programmers stood tightly packed in the office area. The sound of keyboards typing was completely silent. The air was filled with the acrid scent of coffee, intermingled with the pungent odor of sweat from countless all-night overtime shifts. It was incredibly stifling. Director Engo gripped a stack of timesheets in his hand. Standing at the front, his face was ashen. He cleared his throat dramatically, then cast a sharp glance in my direction and spoke. Today, I have an announcement to make. Some individuals presumed upon having written a few lines of foundational code. Their arrogance had already reached the heavens. Chen reported me, and it felt like he was implying that I had crossed the line by being 3 minutes late. According to the company's strict red line regulations, my entire project bonus of 80,000 yuan for this year was to be withheld. The entire office fell silent in an instant. My head buzzed with a deafening hum, and I was utterly stunned. 80,000 yuan. In the eyes of those ivory tower senior managers, it might have been merely the cost of a watch. But for me, it was the life-saving money for my mother's surgery, the funds to pay next month's bank debt to prevent foreclosure, and the entire family's hope for the entire year. I toiled day and night until exhaustion. My monthly salary barely paid before it was entirely used to clear debts. I could only exhaustedly pin my hopes on this sum. At this moment, I heard the testing personnel behind me draw a sharp, cold breath. 3 minutes late, and 80,000 yuan is deducted? Do they even want people to live? Exactly. Aren't we toiling away like horses, working 99 hours a day, all for this bonus? If he himself was late, who is there to blame? Serves him right. Among the crowd, there were also those who specialized in fawning and flattery. They spoke with malicious glee, reveling in another's pain. My throat was parched and hoarse, as if stuffed with cotton. Desperately, I took a deep breath before reluctantly forcing out a sound. I said, Director, last night, the core database was maliciously attacked and obstructed. The entire system layer was compromised. I alone had to apply patches until 4 a.m. I barely managed to close my eyes for a moment, which caused me to miss my alarm. That is why I was 3 minutes late. In truth, I hadn't even had a single sip of water. Even now, my body is still seizing up, but the director was too lazy to even spare me a glance. He continued to intently stare at the tablet in his hand. Your overtime is due to your inadequate capability and low work efficiency. Being late, however, is a direct violation of the red line. Company regulations cannot make an exception for a good-for-nothing like you. I interrupted him. The crucial point is that if I hadn't worked through the night, our main server wouldn't even be able to start up right now. Our entire platform would be crippled today. He furiously slammed his fist onto the whiteboard, startling the intern in the front row. The director's neck veins bulged as he roared, Lin Chuan, what is the meaning of this? You've committed a transgression? And you still dare to argue back? As the core team leader, you, above all, must set an example and strictly adhere to the regulations. If you lead the way in being late, how can I possibly manage this team afterward? Have the internal rules and regulations become nothing more than mere displays? Humiliated directly in front of the crowd, my face burned as if on fire. I had toiled relentlessly for this company for 5 painstaking years. After all, I was still a team leader. Yet in front of so many people, he showed me not a shred of respect. I took a deep breath, and suddenly, a certain string within my heart snapped. I raised my head and looked directly into Director Wu's eyes. I enunciated each word. You are correct. Regulations are regulations. I will absolutely never again violate any company rules. Having said that, in front of everyone, I pulled out the Zone 1 24-hour emergency access card from my pocket and slammed it onto the conference table. This is the key to the main server. According to the recent 2024 regulation, it must be carried by the team leader. However, if I am deemed unworthy of this team leader position, then I respectfully return it to the company. Director Wu was stunned for a second, having not expected me to dare pull such a stunt. Old Chen quickly tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Lin Chuan, do not be agitated." I flung his hand away. I turned around and walked back to my seat, opened my computer, and began organizing the handover documents. At 3 p.m., the testing team reported that a round of load testing must be conducted before the new product launch. Director Wu tagged me in the work chat group. "Lin Chuan, work overtime tonight to coordinate with the testing team and ensure that the system stability is reported." I glanced at the message and did not bother to reply. Old Chen came closer. "Lin Chuan, the director is calling you." I pointed at the time displayed in the bottom right corner of the computer screen. It is currently 5:58 p.m., only 2 more minutes until quitting time. According to regulations, my working hours for today have concluded. As soon as I finished speaking, the clock turned precisely to 6 o'clock, and I punched out exactly on time. Gathering my belongings, I stood up and walked straight out. Behind me, Director Wu's furious voice rang out. "Lin Chuan, stop right there." I did not bother to turn my head, and simply walked into the elevator. Watching Director Wu, his face flushed crimson, as he was cut off from my sight by the closing elevator doors, I was left alone. Leaning against the cold wall, I suddenly burst out laughing. 5 years it had been, and this was the first time I felt what it was like to leave work precisely on time. What immense satisfaction. The next workday, the atmosphere in the entire office became unsettlingly eerie. Old Chen cautiously approached, carrying a coffee cup, and lowered his voice. "Lin Chuan, last night's tests on the new product's foundational framework. The system continuously reported conflict errors, with blazing red warnings, and the director asked me to find you." I did not even bother to look up, continuing to glue my eyes to the screen while performing my daily maintenance tasks. Why seek me out? Currently, I am merely an ordinary coder, strictly adhering to company regulations. My workday ends promptly at 6 o'clock. Old Chen anxiously rubbed his hands. "But that conflict warning pertains to the foundational architecture you previously wrote. The new employees fundamentally cannot comprehend that logic. Should it unexpectedly launch with issues?" I pointed at the watch on my wrist. "That is the concern of the technical director," I replied. "It is currently working hours. I am handling the work within my assigned duties. Matters after work hours do not fall under my purview." Old Chen let out a sigh, turned, and walked away. By noon, Director Wu convened an emergency meeting. In the meeting room, countless blazing red system warnings appeared on the large screen. Director Wu's face was ashen. "The new product is set to launch next week, yet now, conflicts have again arisen within the foundational layer. Who among you can resolve this?" The meeting room fell into utter silence, as the new programmers nervously exchanged glances. Among them, a young man wearing glasses hesitantly spoke. "Director Wu, this foundational framework is exceedingly complex. We require time to study it." "Time?" Director Wu slammed his hand onto the table. "I myself am personally overseeing this project. Where do you expect the investors to conjure more time for you?" His gaze swept towards me. "Lin Chuan, this is the code you wrote. You will resolve this." I flipped open my phone, without bothering to lift my head. It was now lunchtime, which was outside my working hours. Furthermore, according to company regulations, coordinating with other departments required going through the internal management systems process. The director could simply create the requests within the system. Director Wu's face was flushed a fiery crimson. I lifted my head, calmly gazing at him. Additionally, I recalled that Article 38 of the Employee Handbook clearly stipulated that for work performed outside regular hours, the company must provide overtime pay or compensatory leave. "Tell me, sir, shall we calculate it by the hour, or would you prefer to return that 80,000 bonus to me first?" In an instant, the atmosphere in the meeting room froze. Director Wu Chang stared at me for a long moment before finally squeezing out a single sentence. "Just you wait." He turned to the group of new employees. "You, over there, tonight, you will all work overtime. This issue must be completely resolved. In case of force majeure, that security authentication module which is currently reporting errors, just disable its logic for now. Ensure the product launches smoothly." A jolt ran through my heart. Disabling the security authentication module would be no different from throwing wide open the system's firewall, allowing any individual with even a rudimentary understanding of technology to waltz right in. Old Chen also grew anxious. "Director, that goes against our principles. Security authentication is our core defense system. I am the one who decides." Director Wu snarled, cutting him off. "Just ensure it goes online first. Other matters can be dealt with later." At precisely 6 p.m., I swiped my card and left work. As I passed the research and development department, I saw the new recruits still tearing at their hair in frustration. They were staring intently at lines of code, while red warning alerts continued to flicker incessantly across the screens. One of them was typing furiously on his keyboard, preparing to execute Director Wu's command to disable the security authentication module. I paused, staring intently at that segment of code for several seconds. That was the defense system. It had taken me a full 3 months to construct it, and now, it was about to be undone by a new recruit, who had not even worked here for half a year. With a single bypass command, it would be instantly disabled. Old Tran ran after me. Lin Chuan, are you truly not going to intervene? If something goes wrong, whatever happens will be Director Wu's decision. I shrugged. I am merely a petty coder whose bonus has been completely deducted. How dare I overstep my authority? As I stepped out of the office building, my phone suddenly vibrated. It was an automated monitoring email from the system. Warning. The core security gate has been manually disabled. I glanced at the email and silently pressed the delete button. At 11 p.m., the persistent calls from Director Wu woke me. I glanced at the caller ID, then bluntly hung up, turned over, and continued sleeping. The next morning at the company, the atmosphere was even more bizarre. Director Wu, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, was venting his anger on the new employees. As for me, I noticed that on the large monitoring screen, the firewall system's status indicator had turned from green to yellow. This meant that someone was probing our defenses. On the second day of the launch countdown, at 2:30 a.m., Director Wu's phone suddenly vibrated intensely. He groggily picked up the phone. From the other end of the line came the panicked voice of the junior employee on duty. Director Wu, it's gone wrong. The server is experiencing a surge of abnormal errors. The system load has shot up to 90%. If we don't handle it immediately, everything will crash. Director Wu jolted awake and sat bolt upright. His sleepiness vanished completely. He hastily opened his laptop and remotely connected to the server. On the screen were nothing but fiery red error codes, lines that stung the eyes like fresh blood. But he fundamentally didn't understand what those codes were. He could only blindly issue commands. As he issued remote directives, the junior employee on duty became even more flustered, his voice trembling. Director Wu, I truly don't know what to do. I have never encountered these error messages before. Director Wu broke out in a cold sweat. He paced back and forth in his office. He suddenly remembered Lin Chuan, but immediately suppressed that thought. Had he not just publicly deducted 80,000 yuan from that person's bonus? Now, in the middle of the night, to go beg, where would he put his face? He gritted his teeth and made a decision. Zhao Wang, don't worry about those errors anymore. Use a patch to directly overwrite them. Just forcibly disable the error reporting code so the system can run temporarily. We'll deal with it later. Xiao Wang hesitated for a few seconds, but in the end, still followed his instructions. 10 minutes later, all the red error messages had vanished. The system's alerts also subsided. Director Wu sighed in relief, feeling incredibly astute, then decisively hung up the phone and leaned back to continue sleeping. At 9 a.m. the next day, I went to work and clocked in as usual. As soon as I sat down, I sensed an extremely unstable atmosphere. Old Chen was pale-faced, staring fixedly at the monitoring panel, his fingers trembling. I walked over and glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. The core authentication module of the firewall was displaying an abnormal status. A security port had appeared, disrupting the data logs. This meant that someone, or some program, had bypassed the standard authentication process. I pulled up the system logs from last night to review them. The more I looked, the more alarmed I became. At 2:40 a.m., Zhao Wang, under the remote guidance of Director Wu, had used forced overwriting to conceal the error reports. However, those very errors were actually intrusion alerts issued by Mangun Security. Now, they had all been completely suppressed. Even more fatally, the firewall had been torn open with an extremely sophisticated vulnerability. This vulnerability was not large, but it was enough for experienced hackers to silently slip in. Leaving behind a Beidou backdoor in the system, Old Chen leaned closer to me and whispered, Lin Chuan, should we report this upstairs? I glanced at Director Wu, who was standing not far away, making coffee, then looked up at the company management regulations displayed on the wall. It was clearly stated there that anyone who reports above their direct superior would be considered disruptive to management order and would be severely dealt with. I shook my head. The company has its rules. We must abide by them. Furthermore, Director Wu is in charge of technical matters. He surely understands the situation far better than us. Old Chen opened his mouth, but ultimately said nothing. Director Wu walked over, holding his coffee. Seeing us staring intently at the control panel, he sneered contemptuously. Overreacting. I already dealt with last night's issue. You all can rest assured and prepare to go live. Don't be so jumpy all the time. I nodded and silently closed the log interface. At 6 p.m., I left work on time. As I walked out of the company, the evening sky on the horizon was blood red. I took out my phone to check a message my mother had just sent. Mother said the doctor had informed her that next week she would be admitted to the hospital for surgery preparation and told me not to worry too much about money. I put my phone into my pocket and quickened my pace. The matters of this company no longer concerned me. That torn open vulnerability was like a ticking time bomb, lying dormant in the deepest layers of the system, awaiting the moment of detonation. The day before the launch, the office was brightly lit. Everyone was exerting their full effort, conducting the final tests, and calibrating the data. The atmosphere was filled with extreme tension. Seto personally oversaw the operations. The investors were also supervising online via video conference. This product carried the strategic responsibility for the company's next 3 years. Precisely at 8 p.m., the control panel suddenly erupted with a piercing alarm. A series of high-risk error notifications flashed wildly. All of them were critical vulnerabilities stemming from the underlying security architecture. Old Chen stared intently at the screen, his palms slick with sweat. If this vulnerability was not patched immediately, going live tomorrow would be no different than flinging wide the doors to the company's core data, inviting hackers to wreak havoc. Director Mo's face instantly turned ashen. He paced back and forth in his office 3 times. Finally, he forcefully pushed open the door and strode directly to where I sat. He tried to suppress his anger, but his voice still trembled. Lin Chuan, a dangerous vulnerability has appeared in the system. You must immediately work overtime to patch it at once. This is an order. I raised my head. I glanced at the bottom right corner of the screen, which read 8:15 p.m., then looked at the employee ID card hanging on the wall. That photo had been taken 2 months ago. Back then, I still believed that hard work would be rewarded. I calmly replied to the director. The company's employment contract clearly states overtime requires prior approval and overtime pay. Furthermore, my 80,000 project bonus from last month has yet to be paid. Could you settle that payment for me first? Director Mo was dumbfounded. He had never expected me to make such a demand. His face flushed crimson. At a time like this, you are still calculating these matters? The company is facing a crisis. You are the technical lead. Should you not step forward to resolve it? I shook my head. Director Wu, you yourself said it before. Regulations cannot be broken. Currently, I am also strictly adhering to the company's policies. Without an overtime confirmation slip, without written compensation, I cannot work for free. As for that 80,000 compensation, that is the labor remuneration I deserve, and there should at least be an explanation. Director Wu was so furious his entire body trembled, pointing directly at my nose. Lin Chuan, are you threatening the company? Do you believe I won't dismiss you immediately? I stood up and straightened my collar. Dismissing an employee must follow the correct procedure, with written notice at least 30 days in advance. Furthermore, do not forget what I hold in my hands, a 5-year employment contract. If dismissed unlawfully, the company must pay double compensation. The office fell into utter silence. Everyone stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide, staring at this scene. Old Chen stepped forward to mediate, but I stopped him with a glance. Director Wu was speechless with anger, unable to reply, and in the end could only retort with a veiled threat. Very well. You are truly capable. Tomorrow, after the product launches, I will be the first to dismiss you. Let's see if you can still survive in this industry. I nodded, shoving my belongings into my bag, preparing to leave work. As I brushed past Old Chen, he whispered, Lin Chuan, why don't you lend everyone a hand? If something truly goes wrong, we will all perish. I stopped, looking at the monitor, seeing the alarming red error messages on the control panel. Then, glancing at Director Wu's face, distorted with anger, I solemnly replied to Brother Chen, I am merely a poor, humble programmer. How dare I defy the company's regulations? Having said that, I did not look back, walking straight into the elevator. Behind me, the sounds of Director Wu smashing objects echoed, and Septo's frantic shouts. As they hastily ran over, the elevator doors slowly closed. I leaned my back against the cold metal wall, closing my eyes tightly. My phone vibrated. It was a message urging payment from the hospital. My mother's surgery deposit still lacked another 50,000 yuan. Stepping out of the company building, a dark wind assailed my face. Carrying the chill of early autumn, I looked up at the lights still burning on the top floor. A scene of crisis mitigation was unfolding there, but without my participation. Tomorrow will be the moment to witness a miracle. The press conference hall was arranged with utmost grandeur. In the 5-star hotel's banquet hall, it was bustling with journalists, media, and industry magnates. A colossal, off-center screen dominated the entire wall, as the company's logo shone brilliantly under the lights. Seto, donning a custom-tailored suit, stood imposingly center stage. With a confident and magnanimous demeanor, he introduced their social media platform product. This e-commerce platform had taken an entire year to develop. Chief Investor Tham, seated in the front row, nodded with profound contentment. He had poured 200 million into this project, awaiting only today's launch for the user base to surge dramatically and the company's valuation to double precisely at 10 a.m. Seto pressed the symbolic launch button, and on the large screen, the numbers of registered users began to surge. With each passing second, hundreds more users poured in. The entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. Director Mo, standing in the technical operations area, stared intently at the control panel. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Last night, Han had temporarily called in 2 external Utsosi teams to work relentlessly to deploy a patch. Although they couldn't completely fix the high-risk vulnerabilities, they at least managed to plug the most obvious ones. He still comforted himself that the system could surely withstand the few hours of the press conference. 10:15 a.m. Registered users exceeded the 100,000 mark. The clicking of cameras from the press corps echoed through the hall. Seto, beaming with delight, proceeded to accept interviews. At 10:23 a.m., the server traffic suddenly exhibited abnormal fluctuations. The data on the monitoring panel danced wildly, like the heartbeat of an emergency patient. Old Tran's complexion instantly turned ashen as he murmured, "This isn't right. This type of traffic characteristic is not like normal users." Director Mo glanced over, trying to appear calm, and said, "Perhaps it's users from a specific region accessing at the same time. It's nothing to worry about." 10:25 a.m. The warning lights of the first firewall layer began to blink erratically, followed by the second layer, then the third, collapsing in rapid succession like a domino effect. Old Tran's hands trembled uncontrollably. He realized this was not merely a normal surge in traffic, but a coordinated attack. At 10:27 a.m., the large screen suddenly went completely black. The entire hall erupted in murmurs. Seto's smile froze on his face. Technical staff frantically typed on keyboards, desperate to find a way to restore it. But when the large screen lit up again, the display was completely out of control. An animated clip of a skull and crossbones completely covered the entire screen. Below it, texts slowly appeared in vivid, blood-red English letters. UC to the Zin Ugosi. The entire hall erupted in an instant. Reporters from every media outlet raised their phones, frantically capturing the scene. The investors slammed their hands against the tables and shot to their feet. Their faces turned deathly pale. She rushed toward the backstage area, shouting at Director Wu, "What is happening?" Director Wu's entire body trembled uncontrollably. He stammered, utterly unable to explain. I don't know. It must be a hacker attack. We're trying to contain it immediately, but it's already too late." The hacker, known only by the alias G, was a legendary figure in the underground hacking world. It was obvious that he had targeted this platform long ago, exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities to remain hidden within the system for several days. Today, when the press conference reached its peak viewership, he chose the perfect moment to launch his attack. At exactly 10:30, Xi unleashed a meticulously planned offensive, while simultaneously activating a deep system intrusion. The security vulnerability that MGI's technical director had deliberately concealed had now become a wide-open highway for the hacker to enter, unchallenged. The giant skull displayed on the massive screen suddenly began to speak. Its synthesized electronic voice echoed throughout the entire venue. "Your system is as fragile as a sheet of paper. Allow me to express my gratitude to your foolish technical director, the one who graciously left the door wide open for me." The director's face turned as white as a funeral shroud, his legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the floor. The reporters became wildly excited. This was undoubtedly the most shocking technology scandal of the year. Camera flashes erupted with even greater intensity. Countless camera lenses focused directly on the panicked figure scrambling helplessly across the stage, while Satudo remained hidden inside the control room. Every single layer of the system's defenses had completely collapsed. Old Chen stared at the screen in despair, as endless streams of intrusion logs danced wildly before his eyes, muttering to himself, "It's over. We're completely finished." Meanwhile, I was sitting on a bench in the hospital corridor beside my mother, Huang, waiting for her comprehensive examination before surgery. My phone vibrated more than a dozen times in succession, every notification coming from my colleagues at the company. I did not even glance at them and decisively powered the phone off. By this point, the press conference had descended into complete chaos. Seto's face turned livid as he stormed straight into the technical support area. The investors followed closely behind him. Even Director Nigo could no longer conceal his sky-reaching fury. The media outlets in the hall had already begun live-streaming this terrifying catastrophe. News push notifications from major tech news sites exploded. Each subsequent headline was more jarring and alarming than the last. Director Engo slumped into the armchair, hands clutching his head, sweat pouring down his cheeks. The data metrics on the screen presented a truly grim sight, too tragic to behold. At this moment, hacker GY moved, as if through an uninhabited land, brazenly wreaking havoc throughout the system. The system accessed the user database, scrolling furiously. Each record that appeared signified a colossal amount of information being siphoned away. The hacker had already breached the first layer of defense and was directly infiltrating the core data repository. At this rate, in no more than 10 minutes, he would have completely plundered all personal data of every user. Manager Shen, in a fit of rage, slammed his fist onto the table. 10 minutes? Is this all your security measures amount to? We threw 200 million currency, presumably VND, into this, yet we can't even stop a single hacker? Suppressing his erupting fury, Manager Siko ordered Director Nigo to immediately activate the emergency protocol, severing the attack source and protecting the core data. Director Nego scrambled to his feet, but he had no true understanding of the core system's security architecture. He could only issue haphazard commands based on his superficial knowledge. He stared wide-eyed at the screen for a few seconds. Then a brilliant idea, which he considered genius, suddenly struck him. Quickly, forcefully cut all physical power. Restart all servers immediately. Old Chen gasped in astonishment. Director Engo, you cannot do that. The system is currently running at an extremely high load. A forced power cut will cause physical damage to the data. Furthermore, Director Engo impatiently interrupted. There is no more time. Listen to me. Immediately cut the power and restart. Kick that hacker out. The technical staff exchanged troubled glances, but ultimately had no choice but to carry out the order. In the server room, the on-duty staff member tremblingly pressed the emergency power-off button. All signal lights on the server rack extinguished in an instant. The monitoring display also plunged into complete darkness. After a brief silence, the servers began to restart. The roaring sound of the cooling fans echoed once more. Director Engo let out a sigh of relief, feeling as if he had just salvaged the situation. However, 3 minutes later, his complexion was even more ghastly than a corpse. The system became completely frozen at 30% startup. The platform's core data, at the very moment the power was cut, had suffered physical damage. The data packets being recorded were cut off midway, corrupting the entire database and turning the data into a pile of meaningless, jumbled characters. The most critical blow was that the hacker had not been expelled from the system at all. Gozi had long since planted countless backdoors into the system. For him, a power cycle was merely a trivial annoyance. The moment the server restarted, his attack program automatically activated, continuing its frenzied siphoning. Old Chen stared blankly at the chaotic torrent on the screen, his voice trembling and nearly sobbing. It's over. The core data is corrupted. The system simply cannot be restarted. The hacker is still there. Now he can do whatever he pleases with the system. Boss Su's face shifted from extreme rage to an ashen pallor. He fixed his sinister gaze upon Director Engo. What exactly have you done? Director Nigo's lips stammered, unable to utter a single word. Cold sweat drenched his shirt as Boss Tham immediately pulled out his phone, shouting into the receiver, "Contact the legal team immediately! Prepare to initiate proceedings to pursue liability for breach of investment contract." At that very moment, the skull image reappeared on the large screen. Gosi's electronic voice was brimming with mockery. "Thank you for your cooperation. The forced power cut has caused the firewall to completely collapse. Now, let us discuss the ransom." The media reporters in the auditorium went into a frenzy. Countless cameras and phones were aimed directly at the screen. What was meant to be a product launch had morphed into a catastrophe of the century, with the situation behind the scenes rapidly devolving into a deadly void. Everyone realized that the true nightmare was only just beginning. The system had crashed completely. The hacker was still rampaging, and the only person capable of salvaging the situation was currently at the hospital by his mother's side. His phone was also turned off. News of the company's server paralysis spread like wildfire across all social media platforms. Video clips from the press conference, which had been hacked, skyrocketed to the top trending spots on major platforms within half an hour. Countless netizens flooded the company's official social media accounts. The comment sections were drowned in a sea of condemnation, and users who had just registered found they could not log in at all. The money they had just deposited had mysteriously vanished. The customer service hotline was overwhelmed to the point of breaking down. The staff members were answering calls until their hands were utterly sore. Each person could only repeat a rigid, pre-prepared statement. "We apologize, esteemed customer. We are working diligently on an urgent recovery. We ask for your patience during this time." Yet, the users' patience had been utterly exhausted. Some had already begun organizing calls for collective rights protection across social media platforms. Others directly contacted the authorities, asserting they had been defrauded. A far greater number frantically inundated various media outlets, demanding the full exposure of the incident. Within a mere hour, the topic's readership had surged past 300 million. The company's reputation became inextricably linked with the ignominious title of the worst press conference in history. At 2 p.m., in the very first hour after the market opened, the company's stock price began an uncontrolled plummet. Major shareholders engaged in a frantic sell-off. Small investors, in a state of panic, desperately attempted to divest at any cost, only to find the stock immediately frozen at its daily limit. Rapid-fire alerts from financial news outlets ceaselessly flooded the airwaves. A particular technology firm had seen over 300 million yuan in market capitalization evaporate, establishing a new record for the year's most significant decline. Seto sat within his office, confronted by no fewer than 7 or 8 phones, each clamoring for his attention with calls from the United States. From board members and partners to advertisers, every single one was relentlessly questioning a singular issue. Precisely when would full restoration be achieved? He found himself utterly devoid of an answer. Reports arrived from the technical department, each more disheartening than the last. The system had completely crashed. The data corruption was exceedingly dire. The external personnel merely cast a fleeting glance before shaking their heads and departing. At 3 p.m., the call from investor Shen arrived. His voice was sharp and chilling, like shards of ice. Seto, do you still recall the terms of our investment agreement? Within 3 months of its launch, the platform's monthly active users were strictly mandated to reach 5 million. Should this fail, your firm is obligated to repurchase the 30% stake currently held in my name. Seto's hand, clenching the phone, visibly trembled. Director Shen, we shall achieve full restoration at the earliest possible juncture. This is merely a transient, technical malfunction. Director Shen abruptly cut him off. A technical malfunction, you say? The entirety of the internet now regards your enterprise as a veritable laughingstock. The users' faith has irrevocably crumbled. Even if you were to rectify this situation by day's end, who among them would still dare to utilize your platform? Furthermore, should the system remain unrestored before dawn, I shall immediately commence the procedure for claiming damages due to breach of the investment contract. According to the agreement, you must compensate me threefold for my investment losses, which amounts to 600 million yuan. The phone disconnected, and the office fell into a dead silence. 600 million yuan. Not only was it not on the company's books, but even if they sold the entire company, it would not be enough to compensate. Seto rushed straight out of the office, forcefully heading towards the server room. Director Mo was currently in a furious rage with a group of technical staff. However, everyone hung their heads low, not uttering a single word. The atmosphere was terrifyingly suffocating. Seto grabbed Director Mo by the collar. I ask you, when can it finally be fixed? Director Mo's face was ashen. Seto, I have already contacted 3 foreign security companies, but after reviewing the system's architecture, they all said this foundational architecture was far too complex. It would be fundamentally impossible to fix in a short amount of time. Seto let go, his entire being as if drained of the last bit of vitality. He looked around, then suddenly remembered someone. Where is Lin Chuan? Call Lin Chuan to fix it. The office once again fell into silence. Old Chen whispered, Lin Chuan requested a leave today. He said he was taking a family member to the hospital, and his phone was also turned off. Seto was stunned. Only then did he remember that just a few days prior, Director Mo had publicly deducted 80,000 from Lin Chuan's bonus. And last night, when the system developed a high-risk vulnerability, Director Mo had refused the conditions Lin Chuan put forth. At this very moment, hacker Gusi sent the first blackmail email. The email subject was extremely simple. Want your data back? The content contained only one sentence and one number. 1,000 bitcoins. Based on the current exchange rate, 1,000 bitcoins were worth over 40 million yuan. Seto stared at that email, utterly stunned. His temples pulsed erratically. Compensate the investor with 600 million yuan, or pay 40 million yuan to the hacker. No matter which path was chosen, it was a dead end, and the only path to survival. At this moment, he was sitting on a hospital bench next to his mother, awaiting the surgery announcement. He was completely unaware of any of these events. At dusk, around 6 p.m., Seto, accompanied by several high-ranking managers, stormed into the office. His face was so dark it seemed water could be wrung from it. Everyone in the office hastily stopped their work, not even daring to breathe loudly. Seto swept his gaze across the room, his voice deep and grave. I do not care what methods you employ. The system must be fully repaired before dawn, or the company will face bankruptcy, and all of you should prepare to be dismissed. Director Wu, wiping the sweat from his brow, stammered. We are still trying to find a solution, but the core data is too severely damaged. It truly requires time. Seto slammed his hand on the table with a resounding thud. Is the time I have given you still insufficient? It has been 8 hours since morning. Is this the only result you can present to me? Old Chen gathered his courage and stepped forward to address Seto. This foundational architecture was personally built by Lin Chuan. Only he fully understands the logic of each module. Perhaps we should call Lin Chuan back? Director Wu's expression instantly distorted. He sharply interrupted Old Chen. Seto, this has nothing to do with Lin Chuan. It was caused by a hacker attack. Who could have expected such a situation to arise? Seto glared at Director Mo and asked, then explain to me why a hacker could so easily pierce our defenses. Why did the system have such a severe security vulnerability? Director Wu was left speechless, his mouth agape. Seto turned towards Old Chen. What did you just say earlier? Explain it to me clearly. Old Chen hesitated for a moment but finally spoke. Seto, in truth, before going live, the system had already detected a high-risk vulnerability. At that time, Lin Chuan had already warned us, but... He glanced at Director Mo. Because the timeline was too tight, Director Mo decided to go live first and deal with it later. Seto's face grew even more grim at this. Is there anything else? Old Chen took a deep breath and recounted the entire sequence of events that had transpired over the past few days, starting from Director Mo's forced disabling of the security authentication module, to blindly instructing Xiao Wang to overwrite the error logs in the middle of the night, and finally, to refusing Lin Chuan's overtime request just last night. Each piece of news, one after another, plunged like a knife into his heart. The room fell into a deathly silence, as everyone bowed their heads, not daring to meet Director Mo's gaze. Seto turned, staring intently at Director Mo, his voice ice cold. "Do you have anything else to say?" Director Mo trembled uncontrollably. Then, as if grasping a life-saving straw, he cried out, "Sato, this is Lin Chuan's scheme. He deliberately left a backdoor vulnerability in the code, then colluded with hacker to attack the company." "Sato, just think. Why else would hacker understand our system so thoroughly? Why would he attack with such precision?" Lin Chuan must have leaked the core source code. As these words were spoken, the entire office was stirred into a commotion. Some were surprised, some were indignant, but most of all, they were incredulous. Lao Chen's face flushed crimson with rage. "Director Mo, do not frame others with such malicious accusations. Lin Chuan has worked for this company for 5 years. Has he ever done anything to betray it?" Director Mo stubbornly retorted, "Then why, precisely at this critical moment, did he adamantly refuse to work overtime? Why did he stand by idly, watching the company face a crisis? If this isn't revenge, then what is it?" Sato raised a hand, signaling for silence. He pondered for a few seconds, his voice unnervingly calm. "Lao Chen, immediately seal all servers. Extract the system activity logs from the past month. I want to see the revision history of every single line of code." He then turned to Director Mo. "If investigations reveal that this matter is indeed Lin Chuan's doing, I will personally report him to the police for arrest. But if it is not..." Quote. He did not finish his sentence, but the underlying threat was already crystal clear. Precisely at this moment, hacker Gucci sent a second email. This time, it was not for blackmail, but an attached video. In the video, Gosi used a voice modulator to speak in mockery. "I hear you're searching for an internal mole? Don't waste your efforts. It's simply because you yourselves are too foolish. It has nothing to do with anyone else. I'll give you a hint. Carefully examine the activity logs from 2:40 a.m. The genius manipulator forcibly disabled that security shield. Indeed, this was an exceedingly generous gift bestowed upon me." Seto's face was now pitch black. He stared intently at the timestamp on the screen, then looked at Director Engo, who was limply slumped in his chair. All questions now had answers. At 11 p.m., late into the night, the lights of the headquarters were still brightly lit. Elder Tran, accompanied by 2 core staff members from the department, had painstakingly spent 4 hours extracting the entire system activity log from the most recent month and organizing it into a detailed, chronological report. Sito was sitting in the middle of the meeting room, with the projector screen in front of him displaying detailed log entries, while Director Ngo stood silently in a corner, his face pale, his legs trembling uncontrollably. Elder Tran opened the first document, speaking in a calm tone, but each word was like a hammer blow to Director Ngo's heart. "This is the log from 3 days before the launch, when the system detected a platform conflict, and Lin Chuan, before leaving work, had sent a risk warning report, clearly marking the potential security risks. Moreover, he had suggested postponing the launch date to proceed, and the projector displayed a screenshot of the report that Lin Chuan had submitted." The timestamp was extremely clear. 5:55 p.m., precisely 5 minutes before closing time. The high-risk points marked in red in the report perfectly matched the breakthrough point that the hacker attacked this time. Seto stared intently at the screen, his temple throbbing. Elder Tran continued. However, the very next day, Director Nigo, in a meeting, rejected this report on the grounds that it could not be allowed to affect the launch progress. And then he even ordered the closure of certain security authentication modules and assigned Little Wang, a newcomer with no experience, to handle the system maintenance. The projector then switched to the next document, which was an email containing work directives sent by Director Nago. Written in black and white, there was no denying it. Director Nigo's lips trembled, wanting to make excuses. "I only wanted to expedite the progress. The investors were pushing too hard." Sito cast a cold glance at him from the corner of his eye, without uttering a word, as Elder Tran opened the third document. "This is the operation log from 2:40 a.m. just before the launch. At that time, the system had issued an intrusion warning, but Little Wang, who was on duty, under Director Ngo's remote command, forcibly suppressed all error notifications." The screen displayed every operation log in detail. Each line recorded the API address and the identity of the operator. Director Nigo's account was crystal clear there. Those fatal erroneous commands were entirely issued by him. Elder Tran's voice grew heavier. These warnings were precisely the intrusion warnings issued by the security shield. After being forcibly concealed, the hacker easily installed a series of backdoors into the system, paving the way for today's attack. Director Engo slumped back into his chair, his face looking worse than a corpse. Elder Tran continued by opening the final document. "This is the record from last night. The system once again issued a high-risk vulnerability warning. Lin Chuan had requested payment for his previously withheld overtime, and a written confirmation of his overtime request. However, Director Wu flatly refused, and subsequently, Lin Chuan clocked out precisely on time. Throughout the entire process, he had strictly adhered to all company regulations." On the projector screen, The audio recording of the conversation between Lin Chuan and Director Wu was displayed. A clip excerpted from the workplace's security cameras was also played. In the video, Lin Chuan calmly gathered his belongings, preparing to leave precisely on schedule. Meanwhile, Director Wu pointed at his back, spewing harsh and terrible curses. Director Su closed his eyes tightly, taking a deep, fortifying breath. The undeniable truth lay starkly evident before him. From start to finish, it was Director Wu's ignorance and arrogance that had directly led to this unfolding catastrophe. Lin Chuan bore absolutely no responsibility in the matter. Old Chen powered off the projector, adding one final, damning remark. Furthermore, I have also thoroughly checked Lin Chuan's bank transactions and communication logs. There were absolutely no signs of irregularity. In these past few days, aside from attending work, he has solely been at the hospital, caring for his ailing mother. Even his phone remained powered off. The conference room once again descended into a profound and heavy silence. Director Su slowly opened his eyes, his gaze piercing Director Wu. Now, do you still have anything to say for yourself? Director Wu's lips trembled and parted, yet he ultimately failed to utter a single coherent word. It was as if all the bones had been drained from his body. He simply slumped, a pathetic mess, into his chair. Director Su shot to his feet, his voice cutting and cold as the deepest ice. Tell me immediately, right now, which hospital is Lin Chuan currently at? He glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. It was 12:20 a.m. Barely 6 hours remained until the investors' ultimatum expired, and the only individual capable of salvaging this entire company currently remained completely unaware of the grave crisis unfolding. At 1 a.m., in the emergency ward of the City Central People's Hospital, the lights still blazed brightly. Lin Chuan sat on a waiting bench in the corridor, clutching an ice-cold cup of coffee in his hands. His mother had just completed her final pre-surgical examination. The nurse informed him that she would be taken into surgery early tomorrow morning, urging him to make haste to the cashier's counter to settle the remaining $50,000 in advance payment. He glanced again at his bank account balance on his mobile banking app. 38,000 yuan. This was all the savings I had accumulated over the past 5 years. I was still short 12,000. I didn't know whom to ask for a loan. As my heart was in turmoil, a group of people suddenly appeared at the end of the corridor, led by none other than Sato. Behind him were several high-ranking managers, and among them was Director Ngo, his forehead drenched in sweat. Their appearance instantly turned the quiet emergency hall into a scene of commotion. Even the nurses looked up in surprise, gazing at Sato. He quickly walked up to me. His tone was uncharacteristically polite. Lin Chuan, we finally found you. I was momentarily stunned, then instinctively stood up. Sato was the founder of the company, usually acting high and mighty. Let alone ordinary employees like me, even department directors found it difficult to meet him face to face. Yet now he had personally come all the way to the hospital to find me. Moreover, it was 1 a.m. I glanced at Director Ngo standing behind him. He hung his head, not daring to look at me, his face as pale as a ghost. Sato took a deep breath, his voice revealing extreme weariness. Lin Chuan, something has happened to the company, something very serious. I need you to come back and lend a hand. I calmly replied. Sato, I am no longer core technical personnel of the company. Director Mo once said that even if the company lacked a mere coder, the earth would still spin. Sato's face briefly showed a hint of bewilderment. Lin Chuan, I know the company has wronged you, but the current situation is truly critical. The system has been attacked by hackers and is completely crippled. Core data has also been severely damaged. We invited 3 foreign security companies, but none of them could restore it. He paused. His tone became even more urgent. Only you understand the system's architecture best. Only you can save the company. I looked at him, still maintaining my silence. Sato continued. I have had everything thoroughly investigated. This incident is entirely Director Ningo's fault. He ignored your risk warnings, unilaterally disabled the safety protocols, and blindly issued commands at a critical moment, leading to data corruption. Lin Chuan, the company has wronged you. I apologize to you, on behalf of the company. At this moment, Director Wu finally managed to lift his head, his voice trembling. Lin Chuan, I apologize. It is all my fault. I should not have deducted your bonus. I should not have humiliated you in front of everyone. And I absolutely should not have rejected your crucial report last night. I beg of you, please save the company. I looked at Director Wu. That technical director, who was once so arrogant and pompous, at this moment was no different from a dog. His servile pleading, honestly, I felt no joy whatsoever, only an indescribable weariness. I shook my head. Boss Su, my mother has to undergo surgery tomorrow morning. Right now I haven't even gathered enough for the deposit. I truly am not in the mood to worry about company affairs. Boss Su quickly interjected. Don't worry about the money. The company will cover all expenses. No matter the cost, the company will handle it. I looked at him and calmly said, Boss Su, last time Director Wu also made many promises, but what was the result? I couldn't even retrieve the bonus I was rightfully owed. Boss Su was momentarily stunned, then immediately understood my meaning. He turned to instruct his assistant to immediately draft a contract. It must be one with proper legal enforceability. 10 minutes later, the assistant brought over an urgently drafted agreement. Boss Su signed and stamped it on the spot. The contents included the return of 80,000 in project bonuses, full payment for my mother's surgical expenses, and an additional 1 million yuan as a special bonus. Furthermore, it committed to pursuing legal responsibility against Director Wu after the matter was resolved. Boss Su handed the agreement to me. Lin Xuan, this is the company's sincerity. Can you return now? I took it and read through it carefully. After confirming there were no issues, I looked up at the wall clock, which read 1:40 a.m. There were less than 5 hours until dawn. I did not nod in agreement immediately, but instead took out my phone, restarting it. The moment the screen lit up, dozens of unread messages continuously popped up as notifications. All of them were pleas for help from colleagues at the company. I quickly scrolled through them. In my heart, I already had a general understanding of the current situation. I looked up at Sato. I needed to know the current specific status of the system and how severely it had been damaged. Sato immediately instructed an assistant to open the tablet, displaying the latest system inspection report. I took it and carefully examined the alarming data. The more I read, the tighter my brows furrowed. The core data corruption rate had reached 67%. Many crucial foundational elements were utterly scrambled. The firewall had been torn apart with dozens of holes. The backdoor programs left by the hacker were spreading throughout the entire system. The situation was even worse than I had imagined. I returned the tablet to Seto and calmly said, Seto, to be honest with you, even if I were to intervene, I cannot guarantee 100% that this mess can be completely fixed. Moreover, even if it could be repaired, the data recovery process would require a great deal of time. It cannot possibly be completed before dawn. Seto's face instantly turned ashen. The group of managers standing behind him also displayed expressions of utter despair. I continued, however, if the only requirement is to get the system operational again, to eject that hacker, and to protect the core data from being compromised, then this I can achieve. As for a complete restoration, that would undoubtedly require at least 3 to 5 days. Sato rejoiced as if he had grasped a life raft. That is enough, he exclaimed. As long as the system can run, as long as the data is protected, that is sufficient. I glanced towards the ward, where my mother was still resting. I walked over to the nurse, asked the on-duty nurse to look after my mother for a moment, then turned to Seto and said, Let's go. Returning to the company, at 2:10 a.m., the convoy entered the company's underground parking lot. I followed Seto, heading straight to the brightly lit work area. The entire technical staff was still on duty there. On each person's face was clearly etched fatigue and despair. The moment old Chen saw me walk in, his eyes turned red. Lin Xuan, you have finally arrived. I nodded slightly and walked directly to sit before the main control console. The screen was displaying the real-time status of the system. It was a chaotic mess. I flexed my fingers slightly, took a deep breath, and began to type. The first thing to do was to reclaim supreme control. Director Mo's previous blind leadership had thrown the access management system into utter disarray. I had to first regain control. 10 minutes later, I had successfully reset the administrator password. The core control of the system had returned to my hands. Next was assessing the extent of the damage. I quickly wrote a scanning script to automatically verify the integrity of all modules. The scan results revealed the situation was even worse than reported. Several essential modules were completely corrupted. It was imperative to rewrite them from scratch. Old Chen leaned in and whispered, Lin Xuan, are you absolutely certain? I did not reply. My eyes remained fixed on the lines of code, my hands continuing their work. The deadline of the ultimatum from the investors was now less than 4 hours away, and the tasks I was undertaking, under normal circumstances, they would require at least 2 days. But I had no other choice. My mother's surgical expenses had been covered. The company had also shown sufficient sincerity, and more importantly, this entire system had been built by my own hands. It was akin to my spiritual offspring. To merely watch it be so utterly destroyed, my heart was truly filled with unbearable anguish. I turned to old Chen and said, Call a few trustworthy individuals to lend a hand. I need people to coordinate data recovery. Furthermore, prepare 10 backup servers. I intend to rebuild the entire foundational architecture. Old Chen immediately went to make arrangements. Set stood not far away, her eyes fixed tensely on my back, while Director Mo cowered in a corner, not even daring to breathe heavily. At 2:30 a.m., I officially entered the fray. The system's dire peril was utterly breathtaking. My hands flew across the keyboard, while code scrolled across the screen like a cascading waterfall. At this moment, the entire room only echoed with the clatter of the keyboard and the roar of the server fans. Moment by moment, time passed, and I became completely immersed in a state of intense concentration. At 3 a.m., I had been working continuously for half an hour. I had temporarily stabilized the basic structure of the system, but the real challenge was only just beginning. The backdoor programs that Goi had implanted were far more insidious than I had imagined. They clung tightly to the core code layer, like malignant tumors. The slightest oversight would trigger the destructive programs. I lit a cigarette. Staring at the suspicious code segments on the screen, old Chen handed me a hot cup of coffee and softly said, "Lin Xuan, how about I help you bear some of this burden?" I shook my head. These backdo programs are tightly interconnected and must be removed in a specific sequence, or they will cause a demo effect. Instead, please help me monitor the server data. Notify me immediately if it exceeds the alert threshold. At that very moment, a new window popped up in the bottom right corner of the screen. A real-time message from hacker Goi. Clearly, he had sensed that someone was interfering with the system. The message content was extremely concise. "Oh, so an expert has finally shown themselves? Unfortunately, it's too late. I have already obtained all your user data. However, out of respect for your rather decent skills, I will give you a chance. Stop immediately. I might consider demanding a slightly smaller ransom." I paid it no heed. Continuing to concentrate on typing, Goi sent another line of message. "Do not refuse this amicable offer and then face the penalty. Within the database, I have planted 3 time bombs. If you dare touch my back, that entire database will be instantly and utterly wiped clean." This warning instantly made the atmosphere in the room incredibly tense. Seto, his face pale, tremblingly asked Lin Xuan. Without even glancing up, I replied, "It is true, but he has only told half the story." My fingers flew across the keyboard. Indeed, he had planted time bombs, but not 3. There were 5, and the conditions required to activate these bombs were far more intricate than he described. Sito gasped, a chill running through him. "So how will you handle this now?" It was only then that I finally looked up. A cold smile played upon the corner of my lips. He assumed I would employ conventional methods to dismantle his back door. But he had overlooked one crucial detail. This entire system was crafted by my own hands. I comprehend its core logic better than anyone alive. I switched to another interface, beginning to write a completely new segment of code. The function of this code was not to directly eradicate the backdoor, but to construct a virtual sandbox within the system, isolating all backdoor programs inside it, making them believe they were still operating normally, while in truth, they had been stripped of all control. The core data for this northern sandbox, established by 4 a.m., was now fully in place. I drew a deep breath, then pressed the enter key. Lines of code on the screen began to scroll furiously. The system plunged into a brief state of clinical suspension. Every soul in the office held their breath, not even daring to exhale loudly. 30 seconds later, the system sprang back to life. On the monitoring console, the red indicators representing the backdoor programs simultaneously shifted to yellow. They had been successfully isolated. Elder Chen was so overcome with emotion he nearly leaped for joy. Success had been achieved, yet I dared not relax, for the most arduous challenge still lay ahead. I had to ensure those time bombs remained unactivated. While rewriting the damaged segments of core code, this endeavor was akin to simultaneously defusing a bomb and performing open-heart surgery. Thus, not even the slightest error could be afforded. As the hour approached 4:40 a.m., I commenced rewriting the first core code block. The speed of my fingers across the keyboard grew ever swifter. Lines of code cascaded down the screen like a waterfall. Sweat poured profusely, tracing paths down my forehead and dripping onto the keyboard, yet I paid no mind to wiping it away. By 5:20 a.m., the third core module had been completely rewritten. By this hour, outside the window, the sky was already growing dim with the approaching dawn. Less than an hour remained until sunrise. Seto anxiously glanced at the clock on the wall, his palms slick with perspiration. Calls from the investors. Senior management has called 3 times already. Each time, he could only reply that they were still in the process of recovery. Please grant us a little more time. At 5:50 a.m., Magung was finally completely rewritten. I finished typing the last line of code and pressed enter. Afterward, my entire body went limp, and I collapsed onto the chair. The system began to restart. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the main screen. The startup progress bar slowly crept up. 10%, 30%, 50%. Precisely at 6:03 a.m., the system successfully started. All indicators on the monitoring panel returned to normal. The core data was intact, without damage. Our hacker had been thoroughly ejected from the system. The entire workroom erupted in resounding cheers. Although the system had successfully restarted, I knew this was only the first step. The hacker, Gosi, would certainly not be content to abandon his efforts. He had hidden within the system for so long, it was impossible that he hadn't left behind some contingency. Sure enough, just as everyone breathed a sigh of relief, an anomalous data stream suddenly flashed across the monitoring panel. I immediately sat up straight, my fingers once again flying across the keyboard. Gosi was indeed still there. He was utilizing an extremely deep-seated backdoor, establishing a massive connection, and attempting to regain control of the system. Old Chen asked tensely, "Lin Xuan, has he returned?" I nodded, my eyes still glued to the screen. "He is testing my defenses. seeking to find a vulnerability. Gosi had clearly also realized that this opponent was by no means simple. His attacks became more cautious and cunning. The data streams, like specters, lingered within the system. Each time they precisely evaded the traps I had set. I calmly analyzed his every move. In my mind, I had already mapped out a complete attack strategy. Suddenly, I discovered a pattern. Each of Gosi's attacks would linger at a specific network node for approximately 0.3 seconds. This was his habit, used to confirm whether the pathway was secure. A smile curled at the corner of my mouth. I began to lay out a true trap. At that node, I set up a lure, disguised as a weak link in the system, only waiting for Gosi to ensnare himself. At 6:20 a.m., Gosi had indeed taken the bait. His attack program lunged straight into the lure node that activated the tracking code I had prepared beforehand. This code would silently attach itself to his data packets, much like a tracking device on a PC, tracing his real IP address. But Gosi's reflexes were also extremely swift. He immediately detected the anomaly and began frantically altering his intermediate servers, hoping to shake off the trace. His escape route appeared on my screen. From within the country he jumped to Japan, then to America, followed by Europe, much like a global pursuit. Old Tran watched, utterly stunned. His speed was astonishing. I uttered no words, only continuing to type. Within the tracking code, I had embedded a special algorithm. It could predict Gosi's next intermediate node. To pre-deploy a blocking program there. 6:35 a.m., Gosi finally slowed down. He likely believed he had successfully shaken off the pursuit and began to lower his guard. It was at this very moment that my blocking program captured him. His true address appeared on the screen as a string of numbers. It was an address located in a Southeast Asian country. I immediately activated the reverse intrusion program. Following that address in reverse, Gosi clearly never expected to be counterattacked. His firewall, before me, was merely a sheet of paper, fragile and easily torn. 3 minutes later, I had successfully infiltrated his computer and saw all of his true identity information. Simultaneously, I also deployed the final counterattack patch into the system. This patch would completely seal all intrusion vulnerabilities, while simultaneously purging every backdoor program Gosi had left behind, all in a single instance. 6:45 a.m. The countdown began. The screen displayed the patch deployment progress. 10%, 20%. 30%. Gosi finally realized the immense danger. He began frantically launching. Hong shattered the system before being expelled. Data traffic on the monitoring panel spiked dramatically. Alarm bells blared continuously. I gritted my teeth, my fingers typing on the keyboard so fast they blurred into afterimages. This was the ultimate showdown. Either I successfully deployed the patch and expelled him, or he destroyed the system, rendering all our efforts futile. 50%, 60%, 70%. Gosi's attacks grew increasingly ferocious. The system load was at its breaking point. Elder Chen reported tensely. Lin Xuan, the server, cannot hold on much longer. I took a deep breath. Just hold on for one more minute. Just one more minute. 80%. 90%. 6:58 a.m. Only 2 minutes remained until the investor's deadline. The patch deployment progress suddenly stalled at 95%. The system entered a brief frozen state in the office. Everyone's hearts were suspended in midair. Sito clenched both fists, his palms drenched in sweat. The screen suddenly flickered dark for a beat, then immediately lit up again. The progress bar had instantly jumped to 100%. The patch was successfully deployed. At that very same moment, all of Gosi's connections were forcibly severed. The backdoor programs he left behind were completely wiped out. The system had been restored to a state of absolute security. Exactly 7 a.m., the sun slowly emerged on the horizon. Sunlight pierced through the window, illuminating the office. I slumped back in my chair, feeling as if every last ounce of my strength had been drained. The crisis was finally averted. On the system monitoring panel, all indicators had returned to normal, green status. The server operated smoothly, the database intact, without a single scratch. The office erupted in triumphant cheers that echoed like thunder. Some embraced each other in excitement, while others slumped to the ground, weeping openly. Seto rushed over, gripping my hands tightly, his voice trembling. Lin Chuan, you have saved the entire company, saved everyone. I gently shook my head, my voice hoarse. I merely did what was necessary. After 5 consecutive hours of high-intensity work, my throat was almost unable to utter a single word. Old Chen handed me a bottle of water. I tilted my head back and gulped it down, draining the bottle completely. Just then, a new window appeared on my computer screen. It contained the detailed information of Gosi, whom I had just tracked down. I compiled all this data into a file, then turned to Zepto and said, "This is the hacker's true identity and API address. I suggest we report this to the police immediately so they can intervene and investigate." Seto immediately instructed his assistant to contact the police. Less than 20 minutes later, the cybersecurity police unit arrived at the company. I handed over all the evidence to them, including attack logs, tracking records, and all data retrieved from Gosi's computer. After reviewing the documents, the head of the police unit said with an extremely serious expression, "This individual, Gosi, was already on our special watch list. He has been implicated in numerous cyber attacks, but we have never been able to apprehend him. This time, with irrefutable evidence, we will immediately contact international partners to pursue and bring him to justice. After completing the police report, I glanced at my watch. It was already 7:40 a.m. My mother was scheduled for surgery at 8 a.m. I had to quickly return to the hospital. Just as I was about to depart, Seto called out to stop me. Lin Chuan, wait a moment. He then turned to Manager Wu, who was cowering in the corner of the room, his voice exceedingly cold. From this very moment, you are officially terminated from the company. Manager Wu's entire body trembled violently before he limply collapsed to the ground. Seto continued. This incident has caused the company direct losses exceeding 300 million yuan. I will initiate legal proceedings to pursue your criminal and civil liabilities. Your ignorance and arrogance almost destroyed this entire company. Manager Wu's face was as pale as a sheet, his lips trembling as he tried to offer an excuse, but in the end he could not utter a word. He tottered clumsily to his feet, stumbled unsteadily towards me, then suddenly fell heavily to both knees, weeping miserably. Lin Chuan, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I beg you. Please speak a word on my behalf. I still have my elderly mother to support and children to raise. I cannot be utterly ruined like this. I looked down at Manager Wu, who was prostrated on the ground. The very man who once smugly humiliated me in front of so many people. Now he resembled a dog, miserably pleading and speaking from the heart. In my heart there was no slightest feeling of schadenfreude, only an indescribable sorrow. I calmly replied to Director Wu, it's not that I wouldn't help you, but you yourself have cut off all your paths to survival. From the moment you ignored the risk warning report, from the moment you forcibly disabled the security network, from the moment you, in the middle of the night, blindly gave arbitrary orders that led to the data being corrupted, today's outcome was already predetermined. I turned around, preparing to leave. After taking 2 steps, I paused, turning my head to look at him. Furthermore, do you remember what you said during that morning's meeting? You said that regulations have no exceptions. The company's system cannot be changed for the sake of a mere coder. Now the company's regulations will also not make an exception for you. Director Wu slumped to the ground, completely collapsing. Shi Tukyo approached me, saying solemnly, Lin Chuan, the company has decided to appoint you as CTO. Your salary will be 2 million yuan, plus 2% of the company's shares. The 1 million yuan bonus I promised this afternoon will be transferred to your account. The company will cover all of your mother's medical expenses. I gently nodded. Thank you for your trust, Shi Tuo. However, regarding the matter of taking office, let's wait until my mother's surgery is successfully completed before discussing it further. Stepping out of the company building, the morning sun shone warmly upon my face. I pulled out my phone and called my mother, informing her that the surgery deposit had been taken care of. I told her to rest assured and prepare for the surgery over there. My mother's voice was choked with emotion. Son, did you go and borrow money from others again? Mother won't treat her illness anymore. I smiled and replied, Mother, please rest assured. This is a bonus I rightfully earned. It's completely legitimate and honorable. Just focus on your treatment, Mother. Once you are discharged from the hospital, our family will move into a larger house, so both you and your granddaughter can live comfortably. And I hailed a taxi, rushing straight to the hospital. Through the car window, the city was gradually awakening. On the streets, streams of cars and people began to appear. I leaned back into the seat, shut my eyes tightly, and in my mind, everything replayed like a film. Everything that happened in the past few days, from being publicly stripped of my bonus, to my indifferent demeanor while the company faced a crisis, and finally, single-handedly salvaging the situation. All these events felt like an absurd play. But fortunately, the ending could still be considered satisfactory. 3 days later, my mother's surgery was exceedingly successful. Dr. Mu Zheng stated that her recovery progress was excellent. She only needed to be monitored for another week before being discharged. I sat in the hospital room, watching over my mother, observing her face which had regained its healthy glow. The immense weight pressing down on my heart finally lifted. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was a deposit notification. 1 million yuan in bonus and 80,000 yuan in commission. Along with this month's salary, all the funds had been dispersed. I gazed at the figures on the screen. In the past 5 years, this was the first time I felt all my efforts had truly been rewarded. My mother awakened, took my hand, and whispered softly, Son, I heard from the nurses that you've been promoted? I smiled and nodded. Yes, I am now the company's chief technology officer. From now on, I will no longer need to stay up late working overtime. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes. These past years, how you have suffered, bearing such immense pressure alone. I grasped my mother's hand. From now on, our family's life will continuously improve. Once you are discharged, I have already secured a 3-bedroom apartment, very near the child's school, and you will also have your own private room. In the afternoon, Seto, along with several high-level executives, personally visited the hospital to inquire about her health. They brought numerous fresh flowers and medicinal tonics, and kindly inquired about my mother's well-being. Sato then spoke to me privately. The police have relayed news. The individual, GY, has been apprehended in a Southeast Asian country, and the extradition process back to our nation is currently underway. He also informed me that Director Nigo, having committed severe infractions, has been sued by the company. The court has frozen all his assets. According to initial estimates, he would have to compensate the company at least 50 million yuan. His fate for the rest of his life was essentially sealed. Upon hearing this, I merely nodded slightly, not bothering to comment further. Director Wu's fate was one he brought upon himself. How could anyone else be blamed? 1 week later, my mother's situation resolved favorably. I drove the brand new car I had just purchased, taking my mother and daughter to see our new home. My daughter excitedly ran and skipped through all the rooms. My mother stood on the balcony, looking down at the park below, her eyes filled with tears on moving day. Lao Chen even brought a few colleagues to help. Everyone knew what I had gone through during this period. On everyone's faces bloomed smiles of heartfelt congratulations. Lao Chen patted my shoulder and said, "Lin Xuan, you are the best programmer I have ever met, and also the most principled person." In the evening, I stood on the balcony of the new house, gazing at the myriad lights of the city. A news notification popped up on my phone. An investor, featured in an interview, stated, "This crisis has shown him our company's technological strength and excellent crisis management capabilities." I turned off my phone and returned to the living room. My daughter was diligently doing her homework. My mother was busy in the kitchen. This family had finally become a true family. The next morning, upon arriving at work, as soon as I stepped into the company, the receptionist respectfully greeted me. "Hello, Director Lin." Several colleagues sharing the elevator also proactively greeted me. Their eyes were filled with respect. I knew this respect did not stem from my position, but from that night when I risked everything and poured out all my strength to save the company. Upon entering my new office, on the desk lay a new technological planning proposal that I was entrusted to review and finalize. I opened the computer and began carefully reviewing. This time, I was no longer a mere programmer. Having been arbitrarily used by others for what felt like endless hours, I had now become the head of technology, wielding true authority. At noon, I received a special email. The sender was Gosi, or more precisely, from the hacker who had just been arrested. The email was very concise. "You are the strongest opponent I have ever encountered. Technically, I am utterly convinced. If there is an opportunity, I truly wish to speak with you directly once." After reading the email, I did not reply, but deleted it outright. Some people, and some matters, have already turned a new page. It is best to simply let them pass. Before the end of the workday, Seto called me into his office and handed me a folder of documents. "These are the company's new technical management regulations. I consulted your suggestions for these revisions. Henceforth, all technical decisions must be approved by my review. No one is permitted to forcibly intervene." I took the documents and read through them carefully. Then Heilong nodded. If these regulations had been implemented sooner, perhaps that immense disaster would not have occurred. In the late afternoon, I finished work on time. As I stepped out of the company building, the light of the setting sun had dyed the entire sky a brilliant golden hue. I pulled out my phone and called my mother, asking her what she wanted to eat tonight. My mother replied with a smile, "Just come home to eat. Mother has already cooked the braised pork dish that you like the most." I smiled, quickening my steps. This time I was no longer running frantically out of fear of being late, but because there was